Okay, hopefully we're back on the air. So, if we look at India 5,000 years ago, uh, there are no, you could say, significant foreign influences. 5,000 years ago, India was militarily a very powerful country, all these great Kshatriyas, and so there's no significant foreign influence. Rather, India seems to be influencing other countries. Whereas 500 years ago, the situation was very different. 500 years ago, the Muslims ruled a good part of India. And there's a very powerful Muslim influence, as we know, in dress. Much of what today is Indian dress, cooking, language, Hindi, music, certainly, architecture, there are very powerful Muslim influences because, after all, the Muslims ruled India for, as Prabhupada mentioned, and as historians know, for about 700 years. That's a very long time. 700 years ago was the end of the Middle Ages and the very beginning of the early Renaissance. Basically, it was like the Middle Ages. So, we're talking 700 years ago. Imagine how different the world was. Europe, whatever America was, 700 years ago, it's a very long time. For example, America has existed as an independent country for approximately 200, and you could say 35 years or 40 years. So the Muslims ruled India for almost three times as long as America has been a country. They ruled it. They weren't just there. They ruled India. And they had for example, they gave patronage, they gave financial support and status to Muslim musicians. So that for many, many centuries, Muslims have dominated Indian classical music. They established fashions in terms of dress style. We even see Indian art. We see paintings of Krishna dressed like a Mughal prince, like a Muslim prince. And devotees may not realize, but that's the way Krishna's dressed. So in terms of dress style, in terms of food, for all kinds of preparations like kafta and halva, of course, are Muslim preparations. A lot of the preparations that are offered to the deities with the idea that this is what Krishna wants actually come from Turkey. So apparently Krishna is very fond of Turkish food. Anyway, music, architecture, very strong influence in architecture. And then there's a European influence. The English ruled India. And we know that the English affected Indian taste and fashion and style certainly in architecture, in legal systems. I mean, the legal system in India today is British. It's a British legal system. And all kinds of aspects of life were influenced by the English. There's a Greek influence. Alexander the Great conquered what today would be just part of Pakistan, in northwest of India, and but the Greeks were there. So the Greeks, for centuries, were part of the Indian Vedic world, and there was influence. There was artistic influence. For example, if you look at Indian sculpture after the Greek contact, the Greeks, of course, were masters of sculpture, of realistic sculptures of human anatomy. They were absolute masters of it. I don't think anyone has ever done it better than them. And that influenced Indian sculpture. Even you could say it influenced how deities were carved, in terms of the deities that were carved in a very realistic way. And so Uh, it undoubtedly, because the Greeks were really into philosophy and logic. India had its own, you could say, theological tradition, but Greek philosophy undoubtedly had some influence. Not on, I don't mean to say it influenced, for example, Bhagavad Gita, or influenced the knowledge of Krishna, but just the way you go about making an argument, or the different. I mean, India, again, had its own independent tradition, which is very impressive by itself. And also, India influenced Europe. So there's mutual influence. It's not one way. It's not just that everything came from India, and it's not that everything came from Europe. There was obviously mutual influence. Just like today, we see that India is being massively influenced by the West, but then again, certain Indian things are popular in the West. But to say that nowadays, when India is so absolutely, not but just so in such a huge way, such a big way, India is influenced by the West in everything. Wouldn't it be a little silly to say that this is the first time in 5,000 years that there was ever foreign influence in India? But we know that's not true. We know that the Muslim rule of India for 700 years had a huge influence on Indian culture. And so, getting back to our original point, that here we are eternal souls, but we are in the material world. And as soon as we act in this world, as soon as we engage our bodies to cook, to make music, to dance, to design buildings, architecture, to do anything, we are using our body, and we are acting within a particular culture. For example, I mean, if you look at the history of music, musical taste changes. If you look at the history of Western music, going back to, you could say, like, medieval music, Gregorian chants, the Renaissance music, the Baroque period, the early classical period, the mature classical period, the romantic period, all the way up to sort of the anti-music of the modern day in the classical tradition. So in India also, to say that nothing ever changes in India is obviously not true, because we have very powerful evidence that that's not true. So therefore, what standards are there? When we express our devotion to Krishna through music, architecture, cooking, dancing, and so on, is it just cultural anarchy, that everyone just does whatever they want? No. There is actually a standard. Krishna gives a cultural standard in Bhagavad Gita. But what Krishna teaches in Bhagavad Gita is not that offer me food, according to Indian recipes, or make Indian style music, or use Indian architecture. What Krishna actually says, is that in everything we do, we should act in the mode of goodness. So architecture in the mode of goodness, virtuous. Architecture which creates peace in the mind, which inspires virtue. I mean, we know, even in Europe, we can see some of these old churches or old other, buildings which are very elegant. And when you see them, it really raises your consciousness. It really raises your consciousness. And so architecture in the mode of goodness, music in the mode of goodness, food, offer to Krishna food in the mode of goodness, or and so on. So to say that a particular cultural expression is pure and spiritual does not mean that it is completely beyond any historically specific cultural style. To give an example, Rupa Goswami or Sanatana Goswami, the two senior Goswamis, obviously pure devotees. In fact, Nitya Siddha, eternally liberated pure devotees. And yet, if we look at their literature, such as, let's say, Rupa Goswami, the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Vidagdha Madhava, Lalita Madhava, Sanatana Goswami, with his Hari Bhakti Vilasa, and so on. The literature of Rupa and Sanatana and the other Goswamis, of course, very much, very strongly reflects the cultural, the literary norms of their time. If you look at Rupa Goswami's Sanskrit, the kind of Sanskrit he composes, it's very different in style from the Sanskrit, say, of the Mahabharata or the Sanskrit of the Bhagavatam, but it's exactly the kind of Sanskrit that was being composed by sophisticated intellectuals during his time. And of course, we could go into all kinds of details about this in terms of certain rules for writing drama, or certain rules for, Sanskrit compounds and certain type of Sanskrit vocabulary and so on. We can go into all the details, but the fact is that that's what Rupa Goswami was very much acting within a specific cultural context, and within that context, he gave eternal knowledge. For example, what is called rasa vichar, analyzing rasa, 5 primary rasas or relationships with Krishna and 7 secondary. Rupa Goswami didn't invent that. That had been around in India for centuries. For centuries. Rupa Goswami simply Krishnized it. He simply made it Krishna conscious. It was already there. That was a standard way that intellectuals in India analyzed literature, analyzed drama, and so on. Or Sanatana Goswami wrote his Hari Bhakti Vilas with many rules. Prabhupada says that Rupa Goswami Sanatana Goswami wrote that literature with 3 contemporary cultural considerations. It was written for people in India. Prabhupada says that because that time in India, people were kind of obsessed with rules and regulations and rituals. So it was for people in India at that time, and especially for householders. So 3 conditions. It was written for a specific time, a specific place, and for one group of people, householders in India about 500 years ago. So again, to say that a devotional expression in music, architecture, cooking, literature, to say that it is pure, that it gives eternal knowledge, does not mean that the style is eternal. It does not mean that the external package is eternal. So when we ask the simple question, what does it mean to follow the Acharyas? Some people believe it means to dress exactly as they did, to cook as they did, to do music exactly as they did. I have a different view, as some people know. My view is that when we take a serious look at history, we find the Acharyas preserving that which is really eternal, but at the same time adjusting everything else. For example, the harmonium. Everyone knows the harmonium is a European instrument. Obviously, Lord Chaitanya didn't play or listen to the harmonium. But in India now, it's just a standard instrument for religious music. So, to me, following the Acharyas means that we adjust, we adapt to our society in exactly in the same way they adapted to their society. Adapting, adjusting is following the Acharyas. People always say, again, well, that means it'll be anarchy, everybody will just do whatever they want. No, actually not, because Krishna does give a scientific cultural standard, which is that we should make music, architecture, cook, dance, write literature in the mode of goodness. And with Krishna in the center. So if you are acting in the mode of goodness and Krishna is in the center, you are exactly in the center of Vedic culture and Vaishnava culture. And if we do this, it will actually become possible to spread the Hare Krishna movement outside of India. or you could say outside of India and Russia and the Ukraine, which are, wonderful countries. Many people seem to be attracted to Krishna consciousness, and that's wonderful. But if we want to attract people in other places like the Western world, or you could say the world which identifies with the Western world and is becoming very much Western, like Croatia, if we want to attract large numbers of people in those places, we have to adapt. We have to adapt. So, anyway, that's the message. I mean, there's so many other things to talk about Krishna. We could talk about souls and incarnations and everything, but perhaps at this point, for the devotees in Croatia, if you have any questions, perhaps you could either, type them out on chat because we're connected by Skype, or if people on Ustream can somehow figure out a way to get questions to me so I can read them, I would be happy to try my best to answer your questions. Nothing yet? I guess there's actually a slight delay with Skype, so when I say something, it comes out on Skype several seconds later, so I guess people are just now hearing what I said. In the meantime, while we're waiting for questions, I can tell you something about what I'm doing. We started, of course, the Krishna West Center in Chapel Hill, which is now under the leadership of dear H.D.Goswami. And it's going very, very well, very successfully. Many, many intelligent students are being attracted to Krishna consciousness, are chanting japa, are taking the process seriously. So devotees have been there for over 30 years in that area, and almost 35 years. And with this approach now, they are getting results like never before. Also, some other devotees have gone to Austin, Texas, and they are developing a Krishna West program there. We also have programs in many programs in Mexico, and we're developing programs in Argentina, in Brazil, in Italy, and in Germany, and in Denmark. So personally, one other point I could mention perhaps, as some of you may know, I was engaged in some discussions with the governing body commission of ISKCON, and we had some disagreements and so on, but by Krishna's mercy, we are now reconciling these things and establishing peace between us. The GBC is accepting that we will work together in peace. They're not going to try to impose on me any special conditions. And I will go to the GBC meeting in Mumbai in October. Prabhupada said if there's some disagreement, the devotees should sit down together and discuss, so we're going to do that in Mumbai, India, in October. And so on that front, in that area of relations in ISKCON, everything seems to be peaceful. So, let's see. So no questions yet. If no questions come in, then I could say one more thing. Question did come in. Okay, here we go. How do you see institutional reform regarding your topic today? How long will it take to embrace it? I think it is a big mistake to think that we have to change all of ISKCON. Religious institutions tend to be very conservative, sometimes in a valuable way, sometimes in a harmful way. But that's the reality of it. And so in Krishna West, I've always emphasized that we should create programs and show people practically that it works, and that's actually what's happening. Many people have said to us, why don't you show that it works? And then when we do, it seems like many of them are not paying attention. But anyway, so in Croatia or America or Germany or Brazil or Argentina, wherever, we should positively go out and spread Krishna consciousness, bring Krishna to people. And it's really a big waste of time and energy to fight with other devotees, because when we fight with other devotees, it doesn't really help Prabhupada. Prabhupada once said to me, actually, that when devotees fight among themselves, that's Maya's special trick. And so life is so short. We have so little time and energy and money. So whatever we have, we should use to spread Krishna consciousness. Those of us who understand the importance of a Krishna West approach should go out and very positively spread the movement. And rather than waste our time and energy fighting with other devotees, which doesn't really help the world. And so in Croatia and everywhere else, we have that opportunity. I mean, there are so many people there that we can approach, we can talk to. It's not, we don't need big buildings, we don't need all kinds of rituals. All we really need is just to go out and do it, just talk to people. For example, in Europe, there's so many great old churches, cathedrals, and yet religion is declining, certainly in Western Europe, very much. And so people, cathedrals have become tourist attractions. So people do not surrender to buildings. People do not surrender to buildings. They surrender to, well, first of all, they surrender to pure knowledge, and especially when that pure knowledge is presented by someone whom they really like. If you meet someone and that person really likes you, really sees that you're truly a spiritual person, that you are really in your own way Krishna conscious, that you are sincere, people are looking for authentic relationships that will make their life better. So if we just go out and give Krishna to people very sincerely and intelligently, as people support us, we'll have plenty of buildings. It's not that first we have to get a building. I mean, if you have a building, that's great. If you have a building, wonderful. Use your building for Krishna. But in terms of expanding and developing, let's just use whatever we have. If you have some space, use it, invite people, do programs, go out. And if we do that, everything will come. Everything will come if we just devote ourselves to spreading Krishna's message in what we consider to be the most appropriate way. And if that happens, the most powerful language in the world is success. The more we have success in preaching Krishna consciousness, the more devotees in ISKCON and outside of ISKCON will understand that this is the way to do it. So what we really need to do is succeed. We need to go out there and really do it and not worry about winning arguments with people who believe that all these external things are somehow eternal principles of Bhakti Yoga. In chapter 6 of the Nectar of Devotion, Rupa Goswami gives a list of the essential principles of Krishna consciousness. And all these external things, they're just not on the list. And Prabhupada and Rupa Goswami say, if particular aspects of life are not on this list, then they're not eternal. They're just details that you can adjust. So, you have mentioned that at the time of Lord Chaitanya there was also fanaticism in understanding eternal spiritual truths. How Vaishnavas dealt with them at that time? Well, first of all, the Muslims were not really open to interfaith programs. They were violent, they were fanatical, many of them, not all of them, but actually, ironically, the Muslims who were not fanatical were persecuted by the Muslim leaders. So, of course, Akbar was much more liberal and open. He was Akbar was a different person, but there were other. He was born in 1542. So actually, Akbar was born just about Was it Lord Chaitanya lived in this world for, what was it, 42 years or something, or 40? So Akbar was born after Lord Chaitanya, But Lord Chaitanya himself left this world in 1534, and Akbar, so Akbar was born a few years after Lord Chaitanya. But during Lord Chaitanya's time, there was, of course, a lot of fanaticism, violence. You can see how they dealt with Haridas Thakur. So the Vaishnavas basically tried to protect themselves from the government, tried to be discreet, and they simply did their own programs among themselves. Another question in Portuguese. I'll translate to English. Can I ask a question? What would be the best way to practice Sankirtan in public, in the public Sankirtan in the West, so that people are attracted and become interested in what they see, and so that they want to really approach more seriously and not just at that moment? Yeah, I mean, in terms of Harinam Sankirtan, I don't want to just go out there and do like a circus show. That's not personally what I want to do. I don't want to just go out there and do a show and people clap and like it and take our picture and maybe give a donation, but it's sort of like entertainment, exotic entertainment. I believe that we should do Sankirtan in a way that attracts people, so that people think, maybe I could do this, maybe this could be my life. And so I would say whatever country you're in, chant Krishna's names in public at a time, a place, and in a manner which are culturally appropriate in your country. So, for example, if you're in Croatia, or that question came from Brazil, if you live in a country, you should know what is appropriate, what is respectable in your country. And so do Harinam Sankirtan in ways, in a time, in a place, and in a manner which are respectable and appropriate in your country. Another question came in. Is there any reference in Shastra about chanting on beads being more effective than not chanting on beads, like clickers, stream-on clicker? Or with your fingers, perhaps keep mentioning that the six Goswamis and Lord Chaitanya chanted on beads, so we should do the same for a better result. Okay, here are some facts. And as the Romans used to say, don't kill the messenger. I researched in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and the Chaitanya Charitamrita does not mention japa beads. It does mention neck beads. It mentions japa and counting the japa, but it does not mention japa beads. I am not saying that we should not chant on japa beads. That's not my point. I'm just saying that there's no evidence, at least in the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, that Lord Chaitanya or his followers chanted on japa beads. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It's just apparently not an eternal thing. It's possible, I can't say for sure, that when the Portuguese and other Europeans went to India and brought their rosary, that might have had some influence. I don't know. We know that people tied knots in a string, so they would count on a string with knots. We know definitely that people counted their japa. Haridas Thakur did that. The six Goswamis, it said Sankhya Purvaka, by keeping track of a certain number, using a certain regulated number of round. That Sankhya Purvaka Namagana, they chanted Krishna's names a specific number of times. So we know that. But as far as japa beads themselves, we just don't have evidence in the CC that they were around at that time. Then another question. You have mentioned, could you tell us what we can adjust and what we cannot change? Okay. Basically, as I've said many times, there are three things that we cannot change because Prabhupada did not want us to change them. And that is uh, our philosophy, our spiritual philosophy, our basic spiritual practice that Prabhupada gave us, sadhana bhakti, and our institution. Prabhupada wanted us to serve his institution because the world, if you understand history, if you seriously studied the history of religions, then you know that the world needs an international society for Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada wanted us, unity makes strength. So Prabhupada wanted us to work in his institution. And I've tried to set an example that if there are things in the institution that you really have trouble with, then you patiently work to correct things. I've tried to do that. I've tried to set an example that even though I had, very serious disagreements with some leaders, but I have tried to follow Prabhupada's instructions and work within ISKCON to correct these things. And of course, our philosophy and practice. Now, I wrote a paper called Thoughts on Deviation or something. I published a paper a little while ago in which I analyzed famous historical deviations in ISKCON. And sometimes people say Krishna West is just a reincarnation of those deviations. But actually, I showed, I believe, logically, that those famous deviations changed all three things that Prabhupada said not to change. They changed the philosophy, the practice, and the institutional loyalty. Whereas in Krishna West, we strictly follow Prabhupada's philosophy. I would say, in fact, perhaps more strict than some famous conservative leaders who, dabble, get into all kinds of gopiology and all kinds of theories about intimate topics, whereas in Krishna West, we tend to just really teach that which Prabhupada taught, hopefully in an intelligent way. Prabhupada once wrote me a letter and said, read my books and then explain them in your own words. So my own words happen to be sort of a Western rational approach. But that's what Prabhupada told me to do. Prabhupada also said to me, I should get a material education. Prabhupada ordered me to get a material education so that I could explain Krishna consciousness to educated Western people. So even though I have this somewhat rational, at times even academic, Western approach, but if you look at the content, the philosophy we're teaching, very much directly Prabhupada's teachings. And in terms of our spiritual practice, we do everything Prabhupada said to do. In terms of japa, in terms of everything. So that's, in a nutshell, let's say, just to make it very simple, we cannot change our philosophy, our practice, or our institutional framework. But in terms of details, like Prabhupada thought it was silly that things like dress. I mean, I wrote those papers. I gave all those quotes. Prabhupada himself saying, who cares about dress? Dress is a dead thing. So some people they can't hear that. We have to be careful that when we keep Prabhupada in the center, we keep all of Prabhupada in the center. It seems that some people filter out half of Prabhupada and then keep the half they like in the center. But we have to keep all of Prabhupada in the center. And so in Krishna West, everything we're doing is very much authorized and even repeatedly authorized by Prabhupada. So another question, is there any reference? Oh, I already did that one. So any other questions? Last chance. If not, I guess we will say goodbye. Anyway, thank you all of you who are participating. Let's see, one more thing from Croatia. Oh, when will you come to Croatia? Now that is a good question. I told you that I'm going to the GBC meeting in Mumbai in October. So at least I'll have the pleasure of flying over Croatia. But either going to India or coming back, I would like to stop in some of these countries, like Croatia and also the Mandasriyas in Belgrade, and other places in Europe. So yes, we'll be in touch, and since I'm going to be going that way anyway, it would be nice to visit some of these countries. I know Croatia is a very special country with many very sincere Vaishnavas, and some other people, but many very sincere Vaishnavas. So thank you all very much. Perhaps I will end the Skype broadcast, and then after the Skype, if the devotees in Croatia can stay on the line, then perhaps I can speak to you for a moment on Skype. So thank you very much. Thank you for listening.